Hello everyone and welcome back to Feral Dolls. So for this project I'm going to make the long-awaited Stella Enchantix doll. This is a new series on my channel where I make the Winx Enchantix fairies using Monster High dolls as bases. So if you haven't seen the first one where I make Layla aka Aisha, check that out after you finish watching this video. And as always guys, before I get started, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like this video if you like it of course, and comment. I love reading all your comments. With that all being said, let's get started. So as a base for Stella, I chose this Create a Monster Vampire doll. I have been very picky about finding the best dolls for Winx fairies from Monster High to match their weird triangle shaped jawline. So I will be using this specific mold for Stella, and as well as for Tekna and Bloom in the future. But anyhow, I began the preparation process by just easily disconnecting her head from her body, since it's a cam body, it doesn't have the weird mechanism in it. And then I quickly removed her factory paint with 100% pure acetone. Then off camera I made a wig cap for her using 3 layers of tulle, and then I cut it out. But before I make her wig, I did her face up first. Off camera I sprayed her head with 3 layers of Mr. Super Clear, and then I waited for it to dry for 30 minutes, and then I blushed her face with Pan Pastels. Now I didn't really have a tenor shade of Pan Pastels, so I was using my regular Faber-Castell pastels to change her skin tone, and I really tried my best to make it a bit tanner, just like in the cartoon. So if you notice that she's a bit paler than the cartoon, understand that it's not done intentionally. I literally just didn't have a specific shade of pastels to do it. But anyhow, I drew her eye shape with pencils, and then I also drew her irises. Then I blushed her yellow eyeshadow, and I also blushed her eye color. And then I blushed her lips orange. Off camera I painted her scleras with white acrylics, and then I drew her pupils. I also painted her sclera with another layer of acrylics. And then I drew some highlights to her irises. Then I began drawing her black eyeliner, and then her eyebrows. And then it was time to paint her yellow eyeliner, and just like with Layla, instead of doing an eyeshadow, I decided to paint an eyeliner with acrylics. Then I also added catch lights to her eyes. And then I also painted her eyelashes. In the end I also decided to give her freckles and then covered them with Pearl-X powders. Now after I added the freckles and did the Pearl-X powders, I started feeling very unsure about this face up. I got so extremely obsessive, I would constantly take a picture of her face up, look at it, then take another picture, compare it under different lighting, to the point that I was losing my mind already. I didn't like it that much. For me, it just didn't look like Stella at all, and the freckles looked so out of place. When I painted them, I thought that with the whole freckles being activated on the sunlight thing, this will fit with Stella, but it just didn't really look good on her either. So just like with 90% of my projects, I made the decision to erase this and start it all over again. Also, after I erased her face, it got some orange stains, so I was like, let's just add some benzoyl peroxide and get rid of them. So I applied that to her face, covered it with a kitchen rub, then I left it under a lamp for 30 minutes. And when I removed it, it didn't do anything to her face, so I guess it just works for ink stains only. So I washed her face, did 3 layers of MSC and began the repainting. This time what I've noticed is that when I was drawing with pencils, the surface felt kind of smudgy. All the drawing looked blurred, and I guess it's because the benzoyl peroxide got soaked inside the vinyl heads, and it just irritated me so much that I wasn't able to continue with this base. So I erased this once again, and then I took another cam head and began drawing on it instead. The eye shape, just like in Layla's video, at first I didn't quite draw it matching the Winx art style, and now I made the same mistake again. Probably the mold changed and I wasn't quite used to it, so I made sure to draw the eye shape as close to the Winx art style as possible. And then this time, for some reason, I decided to make the eyes more orange, even though they are actually golden, so that was definitely a great start. Also, the way I paint the scleras very smoothly so that you can't really see any brush strokes is that I make the acrylic paint slightly more wet, because when you apply it with less liquid, it tends to show the brush strokes and you end up with not a very smooth surface. I also wet the tip of the pencil to do the highlights on her irises. And then I made sure to very nicely blend it. Now just look at her face in this stage. Despite the eye color being orange instead of yellow, it looked very nice, so I ended up overdoing everything and I eventually ruined it. I seriously just don't understand what is going on with me during this project. It just wasn't working. Anything I did trying to fix this ended up making it 10 times worse. I was stuck painting Stella's face in more than 2 weeks, like I couldn't even sleep at night at some point, and I was really considering just quitting this series because of this. And I'm the type of an artist, I'm very nervous and kind of emotional. When stuff isn't working, people with common sense will just take a break for a while, do something else, like distract themselves. And I'm not that. I will only rest if I am satisfied with what I'm doing. Like if there is a scar on my skin, I'm going to take the knife and scratch the hell out of it until it stops hurting, and essentially making it worse. Like I can't just let it heal on its own. Like if there is a problem, I need to solve it immediately. So I ended up removing all this, and this time I didn't record the half of the painting because I needed to fully concentrate on this. So this is how her face up looked when I started recording again. And let me tell you, I was quite happy with it. Like it felt very Stella to me, so it gave me some confidence to keep painting on this base. And I kind of wanted her to have this a bit bitchy facial expression, like a little bit, kind of saying like, watch me get my kingdom back from, I don't know, Cassandra and her hideous daughter Himera.
Today's the day I'm gonna poison my ugly stepmother and her bitch daughters.
Like very similar to the screenshots from the cartoon. So in this stage I really nicely darkened her black eyeliner, and then I drew the spots where her yellow eyeliner is supposed to be, and then I painted over it with acrylics. Then I drew and blushed her lower eyelids. And drew her eyebrow hair. And then I also drew her eyelashes, trying my best to draw them very thin and delicate. Then at the end I also painted the texture on her lips. Then off camera I gave her eyes some catch lights. And this time I gave her dot-shaped catch lights, kind of similar with Winx art style. And for the final layer I added the Pearl-X powders, and then the face up was finally done. And then I sanded her body and forgot to record anything from her body blushing. I thought that I recorded some clips, but I didn't, so I only have this footage of me applying Pearl-X powders at the end. Then for her hair, just like with Aisha, I'm going to use this beautiful alpaca hair. I already processed and washed it off camera, and now I'm just going to brush it with a pet brush, then iron it with my hair iron. And this is the hair that I ended up with. And of course I still have to dye it yellow, so this is the hair color that I will be using. I actually bought this hair dye in 2022, and back then I wasn't able to go to a more professional hair dye store, so I bought it from a random drugstore, so it was kind of cheap, but I still decided to give it a chance, even though the graphic design on the packaging isn't giving any hope. But I mean, it says Stoiky Насыщенный цвет, which means long-lasting rich colors, so let's see how насыщенный it is actually.
Очень-очень affordable.
So I took the scale and then I began adding the dyes with the oxy. I added 20 grams of dye with 25 grams of 6% oxy. And then I mixed this diarrhea together. And then I spent hours applying this to the alpaca hair. Once I finished this process, I washed the dye from it, and can you guys tell me the difference, please? Like, yeah, there is a slight difference, like I can see that, but if you compare this color with the color on the packaging, it's nothing like it. So did I do something wrong in here? Was I supposed to use a different percentage of oxy or something? Like, I don't understand why it is not as saturated just like in the packaging. If you are a hairstylist, will you please let us know? But I don't know, so I already predicted that this is definitely going to happen, because I mean, of course it is, like, hello, it's me. So I bought some yellow reed dye from UK, and it says yellow on the packaging for a reason, right? It doesn't say orange. So somehow it dyed orange. Honestly, at this point, I was so angry. First the freckles, then the orange eyes, now the orange hair. It's like freaking Bloom Soul came and was trying to get her screen time.
And that's when I realized I ran away because I want attention.
So after wasting so much hair, and the thing is, why I didn't think for a second just to try dyeing small amounts of hair for testing first, like why I was so sure it's going to have the result I wanted. But anyways, this time I dyed the hair in hot water, but not on a stove, and added small amounts of reed dye. And this is how it looked. I mean, after all that hustle, it was finally perfect, so I began making the wefts. I placed the hair on this plastic tape, and then I added the tacky glue. Then once the glue dried, I peeled it off. First I took the hair from the edges, and then I pulled some of the hairs that didn't get glued so that I will reuse them. And then I brushed through the wefts to remove all the leftover ones. And then I began attaching the wefts to her wig cap. I applied the tacky glue, and then I glued the wefts on. And then I did another layer of tacky glue and made sure to blend it nicely with her wig cap with a brush. Then I repeated the same process for the rest of the sections. And I also stick her pigtails, and the pigtails were a slightly lighter shade of blonde. I mean, just like in the reference photos, I wanted her hair to be two-tone as well. Then I also glued her bangs. And then I glued the lighter blonde in between the bangs. And then I also added another layer of wefts under the bangs as well. And I cut out the access of camera. I also glued some wefts from the inside of her wig cap to cover up the wig cap edge. In this moment I also ran out of dyed alpaca hair, so I had to re-dye some with the same steps so that the shade won't be any different. Then I covered all the missing gaps with it. And then it was time to style and gather this hairstyle to cover all the glued sections. So I tied the hair on her bangs and then I stitched it in place. And then I flipped this section to cover the edge of her bangs. And then I flipped these sections and tied to her pigtail. Also, these sections were still bold and you could see the glued wefts, so I'm going to cover them with twisted braids. So I did the twists of camera and then I glued them from the inside of her wig cap and then I stitched them near her pigtails. Then off camera I also added her baby hairs and glued all these tiny gemstones. And the wig was finally done and I could remove all her head wrapping. And then I started wrapping her torso. I finally went and bought paper tape after 2 projects later and then I drew her crop top. And then I cut it out, placed it on paper and cut out the axes. I also went for fabric shopping and this time I immediately found this orange fabric and I also bought some tulle. Then I traced those patterns on fabric and repeated the same steps. Then I thread checked all their edges. And just like with Layla's outfit, I did 2 layers of this silky satiny fabric with a layer of tulle on top of it. And I used a regular paper glue to stick them together. And then I cut out all the excess tulle. In here, as you can see, I already folded all these seam allowances with a paper glue. And now I'm going to stitch them in place. So I took my time hand stitching all these edges. This is how it looked, and as you can see I also stitched a line near her breast so that it will get its shape. And I'm going to repeat the same stitch on her left crop top piece. In here I also stitched the edges of her back pattern pieces. And then I finally attached all these pieces and now it was time to stitch these sides together. And this is how it looked. However, I didn't really like that the sleeve parts at the top are so wide, so I ended up redoing them and making them more narrow, cause it kind of reminded me of a sportswear. See the difference? The thinner is just so much better looking and accurate with the source material. Now I also took my time restitching over these seams with a golden thread just to add more detail. I don't know, just to make the seams look more shiny, I guess. Off camera I did the bottom edge stitch and then I cut out the excess fabric. And then I also cut out the excess fabric from the back. I fray checked these edges of camera, and then I began stitching these blue threads or ties at the bottom of her crop top edge. And I also made sure to stitch the hole wide enough so that the crop top tie will pass through her hips. And then I also stitched these transparent snap closures. And I also hand stitched from her back edge. And for extra detail, I also stitched beads to the blue thread. And then I finished doing the golden stitch. And this is how the crop top looked in this stage. I think it's very identical with the cartoon version. I also needed to finish stitching all the blue beads. Then I also glued these chrome nail art crystals. And then I also decorated the golden seams with these tiny caviar mini beads for extra detail. And then in the end I also glued these transparent crystals. And the crop top was finished. Then I began working on her skirt. First I began sketching and creating all the skirt pattern pieces. Initially this is how I was planning the frontal skirt piece to look like. I mean, pretty identical to the cartoon version, but it didn't really work in real life, so I had to change it. But first I began sketching and creating all the skirt pattern pieces. I traced them on fabric and cut them out. Fray check their edges one by one. Then I used some paper glue again and stick them together and added the tool layer. Then I cut out the excess tool. Then in here I redesigned the frontal skirt piece again and it looked pretty good to me, so I cut it out, fray checked its edges, and then I cut out the back piece, which was slightly different from the frontal piece. Then I fray checked its edges as well. And I also repeated the same process with tool. And then I began backstitching their edges. And my god, this took me absolute eternity because I also had to make sure that all these tiny stitches were equal to one another. Also, this pink fabric that I'm using is the same fabric that I used for my Barbie Margot Robbie doll. I also forgot to cut out these patterns that are supposed to get stitched from the corners of her skirt. So I cut them out, then I traced them on fabric and repeated the same steps all over again. And I also stitched some golden threads to their edges as well. Now in this stage it was time to decorate all these pieces, and initially I was thinking of stitching beads to these edges. However, they kind of ended up looking very bulky, so I decided to remove them and decorate them with crystals instead. And for the orange pieces I decided to glue these red half-sliced spherical caviar beads instead. So in the reference photos there are these reddish, pinkish, job-shaped pieces painted on her skirt, so I decided to replace them with these holographic drop-shaped gemstones. And then to imitate this wobbly upside-down triangle shape, I also glued these spherical red caviar beads, but in the process I rearranged their placement and quantity. Then I repeated the same motifs on her back piece, and I also glued these crystals in between the holographic gems. Then I attached this tie on her back and began attaching all the skirt pieces over it. Off camera I glued and stitched them together, and this is how it looked. I also stitched transparent snap closures. And then I attached the back piece. All I needed to do is to decorate the skirt top edge, which I didn't record on camera, but this is how it looked basically, and you will see it more detailed at the end. Then I began making her wings, and the craziest thing about being creative is that I printed her wings, then I cut them out. Then I marked and separated these two parts since they are going to be made out of orange and blue Angelina film. And just like in the previous episode, I took some wire and then I shaped it according to Stella's wing shape, and then I cut out all the axes. Then as I finished all the pieces, I began gluing them together. So I used this super glue that comes with a fixation spray as always. And after I finished the gluing process, this is how they looked. And off camera I cut out all the Angelina film according to the wing shape. I'm using these two shades, the bluish one is called Mother of Pearl and the orange one is called Watermelon Flush. Also, in order to prevent the wire from deforming, I placed the printed wings under the Angelina film so that I will glue them on and place them accurately. And once I glued that on, I covered it with another layer of Angelina film. Then I repeated the same steps for the rest of the pieces. Then as I finished this process, I ironed them by covering the wings with cotton fabric so that they won't get burned. Also, if you hate the cheetah print ironing board case, I mean, my mom chose it, so feel free to critique her awesome taste. Then as I finished the ironing, I began cutting all this excess film while leaving some allowance cause I still have to burn these edges. Also, one of my viewers commented on my last video and they recommended me to use thin birthday candles instead so that I won't accidentally overburn the wings. So I took that advice and I will probably stick to this cause they indeed burn slowly and I'm not risking to overburn anything, so thank you so much for that. Also, the edge burning, I mean, what it does is that it sort of prevents the wire coming out and locks it inside the film. By the way guys, if you notice that my voice sounds a bit raspy during this project, it's because my vocal cords are inflamed due to a virus. I have been sick since this year started, and if you might be wondering how sick I am, well...
I'm sick. Boo, you whore.
So I'm really sorry for that. So I finished the burning process, and these are all the pieces with Angelina film. And in here my camera died, unfortunately. And obviously they couldn't stay so plain looking, so to imitate the lines over the wings, I began gluing these crystals and caviar beads. Also, some of you might think that this is way too tacky with all the bedazzling, which I completely disagree, cause all these gemstones and crystals are very on brand for Winx Club. I mean, these are fairies, unlike, you know, some other TV shows. So of course they are going to be bedazzled from head to toe. And then as I finished gluing the crystals, I finally glued these wing pieces together. And then I continued the line by gluing more crystals to the wings, this time with more yellowish shade. And this wasn't necessary, but I just felt like I could go more extra, so I also decided to glue crystals over the edges of the wings. And then I also glued these tiny stars near them. And then I decided to go complete nuts, and I also took insane amount of time and glued these tiny golden caviar beads in between the crystals. Then off camera I also glued those drop-shaped stones, and then I continued the line by gluing these tiny stones. I mean, they were not really caviar beads, they just came with the stars. Again, they are also used for nail decoration. And I also glued this in between the stars as well. And then I also glued them near the secondary drop-shaped stones to continue its line as well. And then I also glued these slightly bigger caviar beads over these wing arcs. Then off camera I also stitched the beads that you can see in the reference photos hanging at the tip of her wings. And the wings were finally done. Then I painted her gloves with metallic pink acrylic paint. Then in between those layers I did MSC coats so that they will not peel off in the future. And then I did a layer of Pearl-X powders, and this shade is called Firebird. And as I finished it, I coated it with a final layer of MSC. For her tiara, I inserted wire inside the shoelace, and then I decorated it with crystals/gemstones. And then I glued a needle to it and attached more crystals from the back. Then for her fairy dust, I actually made it by hand with some wire. I sculpted it into star shape. I made 2 layers of stars with different shades of metallic gold. And then I glued them together, and then I decorated it with caviar beads, and off camera I made the bottle, which was made using these chrome crystals that you can see laying at the bottom left part of my desk. And for her Enchantix sandals, I rolled her feet with some orange ties and I glued them in place. In the end, I also decorated them with gemstones, and I also glued these tiny suns at the tip of them. Then off camera I glued her wig on and I dressed her up and glued the tear duct gemstones, which was quite stressful actually. I also added some gloss to her eyes off camera. Then in the end I also pierced her belly button, and the doll was finally done. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and special thanks to all the people that made it from the start to end. I really hope that you love the end result. To be honest, I'm a bit scared of how this doll will be received. I mean, me personally, as the creator, I absolutely loved how she turned out, and I don't think that I could do any better, so I just hope that you love her too. Also guys, the exciting news is that she's currently available on eBay to purchase for 5 days of auction. So if you would like to own this one-of-a-kind Winx fairy that no one else has in the world, the link is available under this video description. Also, as always, I would like to thank my amazing Patreons that made this video possible. Huge thanks to Smoogish, Cordula Seagull, Awkward Burp, Purple Pixie, Flying Bacheloress, Angela Reed, SK, Anna Drazdova, Linda K, Stephanie Good, Robin Wenderbush, and Josephine Falk. And if you would like to support this series, then I have a special tier on Patreon called Fairy Dust, and it is only $2 a month, and you will get early access and sneak peeks as well as shoutouts in my upcoming videos. And one last time, thank you so much for watching, and now enjoy the end result pictures, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.